Well, let's start with the war in Ukraine, and NATO's Secretary General has admitted there is a difference between allies on whether to use cluster weapons in Ukraine. It follows reports that Washington is expected to announce a new weapons package for Kyiv, which will include cluster munitions. Ukraine has been asking for them for months to boost its counter-offensive against Russia. But many countries around the world ban the use of such weapons because of the danger they pose to civilians. Here's what Jens Stoltenberg had to say just a few hours ago in Brussels.
Well, it is for individual allies to make decisions on what type of weapons. All allies agree that we should deliver weapons, ammunition to Ukraine, and allies are delivering an unprecedented level of military support to Ukraine. And of course, Germany and many other allies are delivering different types of ammunition, weapons to Ukraine. But when it comes to cluster ammunition, there is a difference between allies, because some allies have signed the convention on cluster munitions and they don't have cluster munitions. So of course there is no cluster munitions to provide to Ukraine. Other allies have not signed the convention, and many of them, or at least some of them, have cluster munitions.
Yeah, Stoltenberg there in Brussels. So what are cluster munitions and just why are they so controversial? Well, cluster munitions normally release large number of smaller bomblets that can kill over a wide area, increasing the risk to civilians. Bomblets that fail to explode can pose a danger for years after the conflict ends. For that reason, they're banned by 120 countries worldwide. Germany's foreign minister, though, already today has said her country opposes the use of cluster munitions in Ukraine. And Human Rights Watch says both Russian and Ukrainian forces have used cluster munitions, killing civilians as well as opposing troops in this conflict. Well, let's go straight to Washington and straight to our correspondent Nomia Iqbal. And Nomia, what are you hearing about any possible announcement?
Yeah, we are expecting that announcement at some point this afternoon by the US that it will be sending these cluster munitions as part of this latest package to Ukraine. As you outlined there, it's incredibly controversial. More than 120 countries, including NATO members, are against these munitions being sent. What's interesting, though, Matthew, is that the US last used them in Iraq from 2003 to 2006. And it actually phased them out in 2016. So it's got this whole supply of these munitions ready to send to Ukraine. Now, we understand that that rule was reversed under Donald Trump, but there's also an agreement that these munitions will only be sent out if they have a low failure rate, also known as a dud rate. So at one point, the failure rate was about 20%, then it was 6%, but we understand now it's, according to the US, it's 2%, but we don't know the evidence for that. So, you know, it's on that basis that they clearly feel that it's fine to send them. But as we've been hearing, it is controversial. You've got Germany, as you mentioned there, that's condemned it. And that's probably going to be worrying for President Biden because it shows that there are some cracks in the coalition on this one.
Yes, so tensions within the wider coalition, but tell me more about the tensions domestically as well, because there are Democrats who are against the use of cluster munitions. Where do Republicans stand on this as well?
There are, because, you know, as you mentioned there, Human Rights Watch have come out to say that, you know, these pose a huge risk to civilians. You know, the Cluster Munition Coalition, for example, is an activist group trying to get the weapons banned everywhere, and they still dormant in places like Vietnam, for example. So you have members of the Democratic Party who are against them as well. There are, you know, Republicans generally have more or less backed President Biden so far. It's a rare moment of bipartisanship in Washington in providing Ukraine on what it needs. There are some concerns around, yes, of course, you know, sending these munitions in the same way that others are voicing concerns. But we're still waiting for that confirmation yet. It's just been widely reported here in the US that it is going to happen, but we're still waiting for the Pentagon to confirm that they are indeed going to send these cluster munitions to Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine's been asking them since last year.
And I suppose, given what you said earlier, we will hear within the announcement how soon they can be sent, because as you're saying, if there are large stockpiles, presumably that means they're more or less good to go, because there's been so much frustration over the months from the Ukrainian side about announcements from the West, but then quite how long it takes to actually get into the theatre.
Well, in order to use them, they need to be launched by artillery weapons. So you can either launch them by air or by ground, but the Ukrainians will launch them with the howitzer artillery weapons, which they're already using, which has been provided by the US. In terms of this sort of stockpile of cluster munitions, just a bit of detail about them. We know that they're known as dual-purpose improved conventional munitions. As I said, they were phased out in 2016, so the Americans do have them more or less ready to go. Kyiv, as I said, was asking for them since last year. Washington had previously held off. And I imagine it's because you've got all these countries that don't want them sent over. There's that 2008 treaty, which many of them signed, banning the use of them. But we will hopefully get more details when there is an announcement expected later today, which is ultimately about this package, I should say, that they're sending to Ukraine, this latest package. It's an $800 million military package, which will also include armoured vehicles, the ammunition for howitzers, and also high mobility artillery rocket systems as well. That's what we understand.
All right, Nomi, we'll talk again undoubtedly in the next couple of hours. Thanks very much for taking us through the details we do know so far.